Hello, everybody. I can hear the Trinity College, Cambridge clock dialing midday here in England, but it's probably good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to many of you in other parts of the world. But wherever you are, welcome. It's really great to be here together and to have this conversation about the antimicrobial resistance crisis across the globe. So my thanks are to Pfizer, who are hosting us today, for hosting us, for the work they do, and highlighting the importance of AMR and the action we need to take if we're going to secure modern medicine. Over the course of the next 90 minutes, we'll be discussing AMR, not just for what we're going to do about it today, but what we do tomorrow and in the future. Because we all know that our actions today will have huge repercussions across that future. We are clearly living in a global crisis at the moment, one that impacts our lives, our livelihoods, our economies, and our behaviours. And it's taking the very best efforts of global science, research, policy, and collaborations to find the solutions. And we've still got a long way to go. So our objectives for today are to, well, I'm never good on technology, folks, are to take what we're seeing and experiencing through COVID-19 and not only learn the lessons, but apply those lessons so we can avert future pandemics. Like COVID, AMR is complex and far-reaching, but that makes it all the more imperative that we work together across borders and across sectors. Everyone online today can be part of this. The whole world needs to take notice and take action. One health, one team. That's the only way we can go forwards and make a difference. Today, we'll also be discussing the value of antibiotics, recognizing there is a monetary value, but actually they're a global public good that our lives depend on. How do we value something that's so invaluable to those who consume antibiotics, invaluable to those who prescribe them, to those who produce them, or those whose policy assumptions take antibiotics as a given? We must be innovative, and we are being, but we need more. To me, the question of innovation and access go hand in hand. We know that millions of people currently lack access to antimicrobials at all. We know there's a shortage of new antimicrobials in the pipeline, and these problems are the flip sides of that very important coin. We've got to think differently if we're going to address this. We're seeing some game-changing progress from industry and governments that we should all be delighted by. But let's not rest on our laurels. They're just a start. Nationally and internationally, how can we go further? Finally, we'll be exploring how the medical community are at the heart of this, and more practically, how can we make that vital difference? We need action, and we're calling on all of you to join us and make a difference. So today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Professor Mark Wilcox, Dr. Kristin Ardle, Dr. Nick Crabb, and Dr. John Rex. I'll introduce them before they speak, but we've got here experts on health and research from all over the world, and I'm sure you will see that their perspectives are really illuminating. But above all, we've got you, the audience. The best thing about these virtual platforms is there isn't a front seat or a stage. I'm sat here in my study after all. We're all here together, ready to talk, and we want to hear from you. So if you have a question or a comment, please put it in that chat box. We've got lots of time after the presentations to get this discussion going. And today, I hope to be learning from all of you. So without any further ado, let's get this show on the road. To set the scene, I want to start by highlighting the global nature of AMR, because we're currently confronted every day on the news by stark statistics and stories about the current pandemic. But I say to you that we can and we will move on from it. But antimicrobial resistance is also a key issue in it. So I'm delighted to be speaking to you today as the UK government's first ever special envoy on antimicrobial resistance. And I think that this role highlights the importance of AMR and how much of a priority it is here in the UK to our government and our people. But also it shows that AMR can only be solved by looking outwards, by working globally, and by building on each other's good work and ideas. I'm delighted that today's event is called an AMR crisis. It is a crisis and a global one. The WHO published its 13th biggest health threats for the 2020s earlier this year. Gosh, it seems such a long time ago. And one was the pandemic, and we've got it. And the other is AMR, and we've had it for a while, and it's still going on and getting worse. But so many people don't understand about AMR. It's sometimes called the silent pandemic, as though it's creeping up underneath our noses. We know it's there, but actually we also know that we can make a difference and intervene through our policies, research, and stewardship. So why are people across the world not doing more? We've seen over the course of this year how a pandemic health threat has a global impact on lives, livelihoods, societies, and economies.
Professor Dame Sally, we are having some connection issues. I'm going to bring in your phone at this time.
Thank you.
Oh, you actually came back. You may proceed.
Thank you. I'm sorry about my study not having a good enough connection, folks. So I was just commenting and highlighting how the economic problems of COVID have really drawn attention to the health issues and the geopolitics across the world. COVID-19 is as unprecedented as it's unfathomable, partly because SARS-CoV-2 is at this point an untreatable novel infectious disease. And as we learn more about it, we see the horrors it can do, short and long term. But the reality is that we've got other infections which we can treat today, like malaria, TB, that would become untreatable if our antibiotics were ineffective. Indeed, during this very crisis of COVID-19, AMR is happening now, globally, where I am here in the UK and where you are watching, it's happening there. Pandemics don't seem to come in single file. They come hand in hand and they constantly evolve. So AMR is a pandemic too, and it's happening right now. Though you may not see it in the same way we're seeing COVID's impacts. I've been comparing COVID-19 to the lobster placed into the boiling water. Painful, noisy, causing immediate and obvious disruption and suffering to the poor lobster. Whereas AMR's that lobster placed into cold water, gently coming to the boil. But of course, after it's got to the boil, the effect is going to be just as tragic and the disruption eventually even worse. So we need to act now to save that lobster before it's too late. Hashtag save the lobster. And if we don't act, we shouldn't underestimate the threat of AMR to modern medicine, to lives and economies. AMR is a threat to humanity. Indeed, today's term, a crisis for humanity and our planet, with the potential to be far more catastrophic than COVID-19. To put it simply, AMR is a threat to modern medicine, and without antibiotics, we risk losing treatments of TB, pneumonia, and malaria. We won't be able to do hip operations without a significant risk of infection, and transplants or even cuts become dangerous. That's to say nothing about our cancer treatments, because they, in giving immunocompromised patients, they depend on antibiotics, and the treatment would become potentially prohibitively risky. And to go back to COVID, we're starting to see evidence of an excessive use of antibiotics for prevention or treatment of issues related to coronavirus infections, as well as secondary infections. I'm told that many of the patients dying of ventilator-related pneumonia have got drug-resistant infections. Consequently, COVID-19 is likely to have a significant unintended long-term impact on AMR. Already today, the 2016 O'Neill report estimates that 700,000 people die every year from drug-resistant strains of the common bacterial infections, HIV, TB, and malaria, which is likely an underestimate, and it's going up. Unless action is taken, the death toll from AMR could balloon to 10 million lives each year by 2050. That's more than die each year from cancer currently. And as we see with COVID-19, a global health threat doesn't just impact the health systems and people's health. Superbugs could cost the global economy 3.5% of GDP in high and low-income countries. Indeed, sadly, the low-income countries are expected to suffer the most, with more than 28 million people being driven into extreme poverty if we don't take action on this crisis and get it right. Meanwhile, a superb Canadian study found that AMR's impact on labour productivity reduced Canada's GDP by $2 billion in 2018. That's the equivalent of Canada's motor vehicle manufacturing industry. That means a lot. And it means between all of us, we're going to have difficulty delivering the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. But AMR, unlike COVID-19's, predictable and preventable if we work together and play our parts from local to global levels, from industry to investors to governments and the public, every single one of us as an individual. Preparedness is so important, but we've got to do it now because tomorrow will be too late. If AMR is a global problem, then we need global solutions to address it. And as we're seeing with the global response to COVID-19 through the ACT Accelerator for vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, global collaboration is the best way to contain health threats. We need to harness this momentum to secure funding for global health crises like AMR before it does more damage to our health and the economy. The World Economic Forum has identified antibiotic resistance as a global risk beyond the capacity of any organization or nation to manage or mitigate alone. And that is the reality we have to embrace and then act on. Knowledge shared is action gained. Prevention today is preparedness for tomorrow. And the UK has demonstrated itself as a global leader on AMR. But ultimately, success has to come from all of us working together. Global collaboration could look like the UK's launch of the world's first experiment to pay for antibiotics by subscription rather than per pill, the so-called Netflix model, and you're going to hear more about this later. But I want to tell you how proud I am that the UK is the first country in the world to assess the value of antibiotics to our healthcare system rather than by the volume used. This particular project could enable NHS patients to benefit from antibiotic treatments that are new, and it'll empower our National Health Service to follow appropriate stewardship of new antimicrobials while providing a return on investment for the company. And then it's an effective incentive for global investment to develop more highly effective antimicrobials. But our global health security now depends on other countries joining us in similar ventures, pursuing similar innovative incentive mechanisms to test similar models in their own domestic markets, or finding better ones or ones that work in their markets. Can you imagine if every country truly valued antibiotics as the global public goods that they are? We'd be in a much better place now and in the future. Global collaboration might also look like the UN IACG, which I co-convened with representatives from the international organizations and individual experts. Last year, we handed over our recommendations to the UN Secretary General to establish the actions that need to be taken at the global level to tackle AMR effectively. The recommendations aim to facilitate the achievement of the UN's SDGs and urges action now to ensure the equitable and affordable access to antimicrobials. Our priority now must be to implement these recommendations through a global leaders group to ensure there's leadership and accountability at every level. We've got to consolidate our gains in this field of AMR and urge momentum everywhere. Global collaboration cuts across countries and organizations, but also sectors. So I welcome the recent launch of the Amr Action Fund, an initiative led by the IFPMA, the Wellcome Trust and EIIB, with more than 20 leading pharmaceutical companies having signed up, including in a big way Pfizer. Thank you. The fund will bridge the gap between government and philanthropic funding at the earlier stages and seeks to bring 2 to 4 new antibiotics to market this decade and paves the way for future collaboration between individual companies.
Professor Dame Sally, your audio is dropping out.
Right. So I will continue till you phone me, because I want to talk about, yeah?
You actually just came back, so if you could just repeat that last bit and you may proceed.
Thank you. I'm going to go on, folks. Nothing will stop me in the fight against AMR, as you see. I'm very pleased that in the UK we're collaborating with new partners from across public and private sectors. In partnership with the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, Fair and Access to Medicine Foundation, we've launched Investor Action on AMR initiative. Essentially, we're talking about ethical and societal governance in companies, recognizing that AMR is complex, driven by environmental and agricultural practices as much as health ones. We're calling on investors to commit to making suitable investments, sustainable investments, and to align with global best practices on AMR. We truly want to work with investors to get them on board. This can make change too. While global collaboration in this way might be unprecedented, it is necessary, and I believe it's doable. We can make this happen together. So the future has to be driven by this One Health approach, because effective antibiotics underpin our food, agriculture, and water systems. We know this matters for investors and consumers alike, but it also matters for our planet. To move on from COVID-19, we've got to integrate AMR, mitigation, response, and increasingly strengthen our supply chains and biosecurity everywhere. We've got to build back better. We must view global health more holistically. Everyone, all governments, must see it as an economic issue as much as an environmental and health one. And of course, it's vital that the international organizations such as the World Health Organization, Food and Agriculture Organization, and the World Organization for Animal Health come together to maintain momentum and ensure global governance and leadership. So we have a One Health approach and that AMR lens that we asked for. Good farm management and biosecurity and animal husbandry systems underpin the health and welfare of food-producing animals. When applied appropriately, they minimize disease, reduce susceptibility to bacterial disease, and minimize the need for antibiotic use in animals. Fish farming, food production can spread AMR, and so they impact human health too. Indeed, more antibiotics, as many of you will know, are used in poultry, swine, and cattle to promote growth and prevent disease than are used by the entire human population. The challenges of AMR are complex, so our solutions must rise to them. But there is some good news around the world and some progress happening. For instance, earlier this year, the Indian government introduced draft legislation to limit the concentrations of antibiotics that pharmaceutical factories can discharge through waste into their environment. This is terribly important as they and China produce most of the antibiotics used in the world and of the ingredients for final antibiotics. The next step is, of course, for other countries to follow suit. We've got a window now to shape our recovery from the world of COVID, but also to shape the future of medicine and the economy. So I look forward to exploring these themes of collaboration and innovation today, and I look forward to starting this conversation today about the crisis, to hearing from you and to working with all of you to move on, move better, and hashtag save that lobster. So now I'm going to introduce the next speaker, Professor Mark Wilcox. He's a colleague and friend. He's a fantastic consultant medical microbiologist and head of microbiology research and development and the NIHR Diagnostic Cooperative Infection Lead at Leeds Teaching Hospital Trust. He's a professor of microbiology in the University of Leeds, and he advises RNHS and Public Health England on AMR, including the utility of infection prevention. And he's still able to co-lead the COMBACT CDI Consortium research project of the European Union Innovative Medicines Project. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Sally. Hello, everybody. I'm just struggling to see how to advance these slides on here. So someone may have to do that for me if I can't do that in the next few minutes. Thank you. So my job in the next 10 minutes is to convince you that we all have a job to do.
Professor Wilcox, please repeat
Yes.
that last bit. Your audio dropped out for a little bit.
Okay. Good afternoon. I have 10 minutes to convince you that we all have a job to do. The job is to correct the undervaluing of antibiotics. We haven't got it right in convincing doctors, patients, politicians, economists about the true value of antibiotics. Next slide, please. These are my disclosures, and we move on. Thank you. So I have four things I want to do. I want to discuss whether antibiotics are undervalued. Simple answer, yes. Why are they undervalued? What are the consequences of not? And finally, end with a call to action. Next slide, please. Kevin Utterson is not an infection expert by training, but indeed he's become a pivotal figure in the world of infection because of his leadership of the CARB-X process, which is a ray of light in a gloomy world with respect to innovation and development of new antibiotics. And in a recent interview, Kevin Utterson noted that he made a footnote in a document 20 years ago and thought nothing of it initially, but then came back to it. And you see the quote here. That footnote bugged the hell out of me. I realized that all the theoretical foundations of how drug innovation works might not be correct. Why? Simply because antibiotics, as soon as they're launched, begin losing their utility because, of course, of resistance. And so he ignored that value of antibiotics and how it changes. Next slide, please. Next build. So there are three issues I want to deal with. One is diversity value. Next slide, please. The second is enablement value. Next. And the third is transmission value. Now, I'm going to spend most time talking about diversity value. And this is actually a rather simple complex concept, in that if you spread the load, spread the antibiotic load, use a diverse approach to prescribing, we'll have less resistance and we'll have more longevity of antibiotics. Now, I'm confident in amongst the 2,000 or so of us here today, that all of us get the issue about diversity when it comes to skin color. However, I'm not as confident that we all get the concept of diversity when it comes to antibiotic prescribing. So when you see this picture, and I believe pictures tell 1,000 words, this picture, it would be ludicrous to come away from this picture thinking that one size of t-shirt, in this case, fits all. It doesn't. Next slide. So actually, what you need to do the task here, in this case, to fit all the models appropriately, is you need several different sizes. And we don't have a huge number of different modes of action of classes of antibiotics, particularly broad spectrum ones. But I put it to you that using a few sizes, a few different classes appropriately is what we need to do. Next slide, please. So the conventional way of looking at antibiotics is to consider their spectra of activity. And I've just chosen three of the big hitter groups of antibiotics here: carbapenems, third generation cephalosporins, and quinolones. And yes, there are some rather subtle differences in some cases, differences between which bugs are covered and which ones are not by these different classes of antibiotics. But the next slide is more important. And that, I believe, is the one that shows the ecological, the long-lasting, the individual patients and the population effects of prescribing these three antibiotics. And you see that this pattern, this ecological threat, hit, collateral damage, lots of terms have been used, differ, and they differ quite markedly. And therefore, we should be thinking about which drug we prescribe for a patient, not just according to its spectrum of activity, which of course is vitally important, but according to the damage that may be ensuing at an individual and at a population level. Next slide, please. Now, the word cycling can mean lots of things to different people, and I just want to keep this simple here. But in the context of this study, where it was a meta-analysis of a variety of different individual studies that had looked at effectively clinical cycling of empirical antibiotic use, and a simpler word here is mixing. So using a mixture of antibiotics, changing your prescribing practice. And next slide, please, the build here. What these studies concluded, or the meta-analysis concluded, is that there was good evidence that clinical cycling reduced the incidence of resistant infections, not just by a minor amount, but substantially. But the key part of that takeaway message was that you had to be effective. You had to do that mixing early on. If you waited until you had an endemic problem then the mixing was much less effective. I'm going to have to pause one briefly. That's an alarm. 1 second. It will stop. Apologies, Thursdays is hospital. And what the percentages are the things I'd like you to concentrate on. And these show on the left the fact that we have a large number of antibiotics available to prescribe in the UK, 66. When you look at actually how many of those are really used in anger, are used frequently, the answer is 15 in general practice, 11 in the case of care home residents, and on the right, 3 in the case of hospital prescribing. And those 15, 11, and 3 groups of antibiotics account for the lion's share of prescribing. In other words, we don't have the diversity that we need to do. And what we see happening with antibiotics, if you want a simple analogy, think of your favorite t-shirt, dark blue in color. What happens when you keep wearing it and keep washing it? The answer is it fades. You overuse your favorite t-shirt, that's the consequence. You overuse your favorite antibiotic, we know what the consequence will be, or at least the direction of travel. And so in the next 5-year plan, Dame Sally, our chair today, was responsible for the previous 5-year plan in the UK. But the next 5-year plan, which she also inputted into, there's a key point that actually says we need to take this issue of diversity of prescribing further. Yes, we do need more evidence, but I believe firmly we have enough evidence about the importance of diversity now to do something active now to change our prescribing practice. So briefly, I just want to cover enablement value. Next slide, please. And this is just to get across the message that medicine relies on the use of effective antibiotics. And the data from this study, I can summarize it. It was a US-based study, and they looked at the effect of a 10% or a 30% or greater in reduction in the efficacy of antibiotic prophylaxis in the context of surgery and chemotherapy patients. And what they concluded was that a 30% reduction would result in 120,000 additional surgical site infections and infections after chemotherapy per year in one country, the USA. Add to that nearly 6,500 infection-related deaths. Next slide, please. So lastly, transmission value, which, and Dame Sally has concentrated understandably on the coronavirus pandemic. What a slip there. Pandemic in which we find ourselves. Now, I should tell you that when this program was first planned, this was before any of us knew about the pandemic. And then the pandemic came, the delivery of this program had to be postponed. Here we are today. And I put it to you that the pandemic is an epidemiological opportunity in the context of AMR. And imagine the furore if, in fact, the coronavirus was an antibiotic-resistant bacterium, and it was that was responsible for restrictions on our lives, for mass deaths, for mass comorbidity, for mass morbidity. There would be a furore, wouldn't there? Quite rightly. Well, that's the prospect we face if we don't do something about this emergent problem. Next slide, please. Simple takeaway message is that antibiotics kill bacteria and they take away the possibility of spread of resistant bacteria. That is those that are cidal, of course. And my final substantive slide before my call to action is this one, which was data from 2015 from Europe, from the EU, which shows the magnitude of deaths associated with specific resistance phenotypes that are shown in the legend at the bottom of this slide. So we're talking about tens of thousands of deaths here, and these are data I emphasize from 2015, and this problem is clearly going to get substantially worse. Next slide, please. So, next slide, please. So my call to action is that we need to promote the multiple values of antibiotics. Don't let people believe that antibiotics do one thing and one thing only. That's not true. They transform modern medicine. And a truly expensive antibiotic is one that has poor value, efficacy, and adverse consequences. That's my definition of a truly expensive antibiotic. And of course, we need investment in new antibiotics, and that this should be a global priority that leads to action, not just words. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. As always, a great call to arms from you. So let me now hand over to Christine Ardle and Nick Crabb. Christine's co-lead for research and innovation at the EU Joint Action on AMR and Healthcare-Associated Infections, and is senior advisor at the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, focusing particularly on AMR. She's worked with all those organizations we need on board: Gavi, Vaccine Alliance, UNICEF, UNITAID, WHO, UN Commission on Life-Saving Commodities for Women and Children. She is really key here. Dr. Nick Crabb, who's going to be joining her, is Program Director in Scientific Affairs at our National Institute for Clinical Excellence, overseeing NICE's contribution to the European network, and he is heavily involved in the new project for purchasing antimicrobials in the UK. And so I hand over to you two, and I hope I'm handing over the slides to you as well.
Thank you very much, Dame Sally, for the very kind introduction, excuse me. Yes, so my name is Christine Ardle. Thank you very much for including me in this very auspicious session. It's great to be here. I work, as Dame Sally said, at the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. I should just say that everything that I say here they're not the views of the Norwegian government or any European government, and all the mistakes that I made, or hopefully none of the mistakes I make, are my own. So I work with the European Joint Action on Antimicrobial Resistance and Healthcare-Associated Infections. For those of you who aren't familiar with joint actions, a joint action is a tool that the European Commission uses in order to get European countries to work better together. So this is one of the largest joint actions in Europe. There's 28 participating countries. I work on the research and innovation work package, and one of our aims in that work package is to look at European strategies to increase innovation. And particularly, we're looking at how to increase antibiotic innovation. Now, as Dame Sally mentioned, in the past 5 years, a number of reports have come out looking at how do we fix the antibiotic pipeline? How do we stimulate innovation? And remarkably, these reports have been fairly aligned on their recommendations. They've said that we need to invest in R&D and we need to fix the market. And the answer to the call for more investment in R&D has been heard. We've heard Mark told us about CARB-X, which has been initiated. Other organizations like GARD-P have been initiated. And in July, we had a tremendous new effort with 30 pharmaceutical companies coming together to invest $1 billion in late-stage clinical development, which is just extraordinary. So that's great. So we've countries and private sector have heard about the investment in R&D and have responded. But what hasn't happened yet is fixing the market. And fixing the market means that companies need to be able to earn sufficient revenues for antibiotics with low volume sales. We want to have the newest antibiotics have low volume sales. We want them to be reserved as a last resort. But we also want the companies who make those antibiotics to stay in business because we need access to those new antibiotics. So as part of the EU Joint Action, one of the things that we've done is we've tried to go out and talk with European countries to try to gather their feedback. What do they think about these reports? What's the political willingness to listen to these recommendations? What are the barriers in place stopping action? But we wanted to look not only at new antibiotic treatments, we also wanted to look at existing antibiotics. Because existing doesn't necessarily mean generic older antibiotics, because some of the new patented antibiotics are not marketed in European countries. And if they're not marketed in European countries, they're certainly not marketed in low and middle income countries. So access is essential, because if there's a new antibiotic out there that can treat a patient most effectively, we need to make sure that it's accessible. So as a part of the joint action, we're in the process of interviewing 11 European countries. We have performed 9 of those interviews to date. We have Germany and the UK still forthcoming. So what I'm going to talk to you now about is some of our preliminary findings to share with you. These will be published eventually, but this is a great opportunity for me to hear your feedback. So if you have thoughts and comments on these, please, I look forward to the conversation. So the first preliminary result is that there's a strong desire to find common solutions for both existing and new antibiotics. Doctors and patients don't care if the antibiotic that they need is patented or generic. They want to make sure that they get the right antibiotic at the right time for the right patient. Shortages of existing antibiotics were a big problem before COVID, but with COVID, they have been tremendously exacerbated. And now, as a result, we see different European organizations and organizations all over the world saying, we need to do something about pharmaceutical manufacture to avoid the medicines shortages. In the EU, the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety Committee has called for EU self-sufficiency in pharmaceutical manufacturing. Now, this is, of course, a huge and costly intervention, but it really does demonstrate that there is a willingness among policymakers to make big steps if they see the needs. The second preliminary result is European policymakers are hearing from doctors, and they themselves are still unsure of the actual value of new antibiotics. So out of the 32 antibiotics in clinical development against WHO priority pathogens, meaning those that we really need new antibiotics for, WHO classifies only 6 as innovative, meaning that it represents a new class or a new method of action. Also, all antibiotics have been approved through non-inferiority trials. A non-inferiority clinical trial means that the antibiotic is demonstrated to be non-inferior or not worse than a comparator, which is typically a generic antibiotic. And this automatically puts the new antibiotic, at a very low price point in many European countries. Now, European countries understand that this is difficult for antibiotics. There's not a lot of patients that have resistant infections, thankfully, so clinical trials are difficult to design effectively, but we'd really like to see some sort of solutions where we can start looking at some solid evidence that shows superiority, if possible. Also, the label is often not for resistant infections. This is getting better, as we're seeing some of the newer antibiotics now for the European Medicines Agency being approved for patients with limited treatment options. Lastly, the last preliminary result is that there is interest in new economic models to secure access to important new antibiotics. Most of the European countries that we've spoken with would like to see a common European solution rather than country-specific, but they want to see it for antibiotics with a demonstrated ability to meet unmet public health needs, those antibiotics that they know are going to be able to treat these resistant infections. They also want to see alignment with the ongoing fair pricing discussions. There is a concern amongst many that when antibiotic profitability is often compared with orphan drug or oncology profitability. And those medicines often have very high unit prices. If we have high unit prices, this will impact access. And access means then that you're not getting the right antibiotic to the right person. So we need to look very carefully at this. And of course, with any new model, we want to be informed by the evidence. And that's why we're very thankful that both the UK and Sweden are in the process of trialing pull mechanisms. My colleague Nick will be talking about the UK, the British model, just after me. So I thought I would introduce you to the Swedish model. So Sweden is in the process of implementing a guaranteed annual revenue. They've actually just last week selected 5 antibiotics, new patented antibiotics, and have said that they will receive an annual negotiated fee, irregardless of how much of the antibiotic is used. So this will not influence the procurement process or the payment options. The hospitals will continue to buy. But at the end of the year, if the sales have not reached the threshold, Sweden will top them up. If the sales go over the threshold, then that's great. The company keeps that. So this is, as you may know, Sweden is a low resistance country. They don't have high amounts of antibiotic resistance, and they have a fragmented supply chain. The hospitals purchase their medicines. So the reason that Sweden is doing this is not to stimulate antibiotic innovation. Sweden wants to make sure that they have the antibiotics that they need for the right patients. So this segues in what could a European mechanism look like? So there's some things that European countries want to maintain national ownership of. For example, antibiotic prescribing guidelines and stewardship mechanisms. They want to maintain ownership of health technology assessment, medicines unit pricing, and medicines reimbursement. A lot of time and resources have gone into setting up each country's initiatives around these areas. And of course, they want to maintain those processes and don't want to disturb them for rarely used antibiotics. So what does that leave? There's European potential, firstly, for the European Medicines Agency to give guidance identifying which of these antibiotics are critical, which of these are really the ones that we need to make sure we have because they meet unmet public health need. Then we could look at a centralized European fund, potentially through the European Investment Bank, and this could be used to pay a top-up payment to ensure access to all European countries. And that is really the key. It's looking to make sure that these innovators, they get the profitability they need to stay in the market, but we also make sure that it's bound to access. And of course, in order to pay out this money, there should be some stewardship requirements for producers. So this is a summary of the evidence that we've heard to date. This is just a start. So unfortunately, I can't tell you that this is going in the process of development, but the European Committee on Pharmaceuticals is working diligently on this topic, and we look forward to giving this evidence to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think I can go straight on from Christine. So having already been introduced by Dame Sally. Firstly, many thanks to the organisers for inviting me to participate in this session today. And what I'd like to talk about is the project that NICE is running in collaboration with the Department for Health and Social Care and NHS England and NHS Improvement. And it's a project around developing and testing innovative models for the evaluation and purchase of antimicrobials. Excuse me. In terms of the sort of clinical context and need for action, I think that's been very comprehensively covered by the previous speakers. The bits I probably want to home in on is that for most of the antimicrobials, some of which are fading, as Professor Wilcox was saying, there are few replacements or alternative products in development. and even fewer that are targeting priority pathogens. And I think it's clear that investment in novel antimicrobials is widely seen as commercially unattractive. The combination of high R&D costs and no returns have led to market failure. And as other speakers have already said, I think that the sort of COVID-19 situation really sort of emphasises the need for more focus on antimicrobial resistance. So the project I want to talk about is linked to the UK's vision for AMR and the 5-year National Action Plan. And one of the commitments in the 5-year National Action Plan is to lead the way in testing solutions that will address our global failure to incentivise the development of new antimicrobials and alternative treatments. So the project we're working on is very much trying to sort of deliver against that commitment. Now, one thing I've observed when talking to a lot of people, a lot of, very, very sort of able people working in sort of healthcare, is that even though in some ways the sort of AMR problems seem obvious, not everybody sort of understands it. And one of the things we've tried to do is just be really, really clear about the sort of reasons for that market failure. And I think they really come into sort of two main categories. So firstly, if we get a new product that's sort of active against priority pathogens, it really needs to be subject to strict stewardship and really used in a last-in-line basis. And of course, if you have that situation together with an absence of significant outbreaks of the relevant drug-resistant infections, sales could really be minimal. And then the second point, I think, relates very, very closely to the diversity value covered by Professor Wilcox. So a new product could offer alternative options to existing antibiotics. It could potentially be valuable as part of the stewardship regimes, the sort of cycling and mixing regimes that Professor Wilcox was talking about. But of course, they tend not to be used in that situation because of their high costs compared to existing products, many of which are generics. So I do think it's important that, especially if we're very passionate about this area, that we remember to really take it back to basics when we're explaining the sort of problem. Now, I do think it's very evident that we do have market failure in this case. And one of the things we did was look at the sort of pipeline of antimicrobials. And based on information updated as of December last year, there are only 41 new antimicrobial compounds in phase 1 to 3 clinical trials. And just by contrasting that with one area of oncology, immuno-oncology agents, just shows the huge difference. In that case, there were sort of 1,512 products in clinical development as of September last year. So I think that does really illustrate the nature of the market failure and the severity of the market failure and the need for moving on to the sort of project that we're sort of running with with NHS England and NHS Improvement. The aim of it is to demonstrate the feasibility of innovative models that pay companies for antimicrobials based primarily on a health technology assessment of their value to the NHS and not linked to the volumes that are actually used in clinical practice. And just to give a little bit of background on this, there's been a joint government industry AMR working group running since sort of 2015. And within that, there's been a subgroup focusing on reimbursement and evaluation. And from a very, very early stage, the principle of an innovative payment model was agreed. One of the things we sort of did was we identified that the health technology evaluation of antimicrobials is actually very complex. We're going to really was commissioned the Economic Evaluation Policy Research Unit at the Department of Health to consider the issues associated with evaluation. And they started their work in 2017 and reported a year later. And the conclusions, they did basically confirm that it was very difficult to fully capture the value of an antimicrobial through HTA, but that there was scope for a pragmatic framework that was informed by sort of health economic modelling and also expert opinion. And as I mentioned earlier, the UK 5-year National Action Plan does commit to test a new model along those lines. So the model would forecast the value of health benefits provided by new antimicrobial. The idea is that value is estimated by NICE through a health technology assessment exercise. But of course, very, very importantly, and again, this relates to Professor Wilcox's earlier presentation, it's really, really important that the model captures the value not only from the direct health gain to patients treated, but also the additional elements of value. And the ones I've mentioned here are insurance value, diversity, transmission, and enablement value. And those have already been described earlier. And the idea is that the sort of forecast of the value is used to inform commercial negotiations, leading to payments to companies in installments, so in sort of annual installments to reflect sort of the access that the NHS needs. So the way we're going to sort of develop this is to test it through application to 2 antimicrobial products, and we've decided that we want one of those products to be a relatively recent but existing product, so something that's received its marketing authorization in the past 2 to 3 years, and one new to market with an expectation of the marketing authorization by the end of 2020. And this is very much a sort of pilot project, but the idea is that the learning from this project, the crucial learning from this project, will be used to inform new arrangements for the evaluation and purchase of antimicrobials moving forwards. So here I've just sort of very, very sort of briefly outlined the scope of the project. So we've developed sort of the frameworks because of the potential competitive advantage for companies who get selected for this project, in that they will be getting sort of long-term potentially quite high value contracts. We've had to do the selection of the products for the trial through a sort of formal procurement process, and that's currently ongoing. We'll then do the value assessment on those selective products, and then sort of final commercial negotiations of the annual sort of payments, leading to the implementation of those payments. And we'll be sort of evaluating and communicating on the project throughout the whole project. So just to sort of briefly outline the sort of progress that's been made, we formally launched the product in June last year. There's been a great deal of stakeholder engagement on draft evaluation frameworks and product selection processes, the commercial model, and the need to run the project within procurement processes. We've recruited a project advisory group. More recently, in March this year, we had a formal market and stakeholder engagement on the draft documents for the procurement process. And then in June this year, we formally launched that sort of procurement stage of the process. And the next steps are to select the 2 products for the project through a competitive dialogue procurement route, and that all needs to be concluded by the end of this calendar year. And then we'll undertake the HTA assessment of the selected products through 21, complete the commercial negotiations to agree the level of subscription payments early in 22, and we expect that those subscription payments should be in place from spring 22. And as I said, it's really important that we monitor progress and disseminate the learning throughout that whole sort of process. And I just wanted to close on what we think success would look like for this project. So firstly, we need an agreed health technology assessment evaluation framework and the complete value assessment for the 2 products. I think we also need an agreed payment framework that leads to successful negotiation of payments for those two products. And of course, those arrangements must absolutely be supporting good stewardship practices. And I think the other really, really important point is that we're incredibly conscious that whatever we do in sort of England and the UK, it will not solve this sort of problem. So we're very, very keen to collaborate and to see that other countries test models that together achieve pull incentives for antimicrobials and really stimulate companies to increase investment. And it really doesn't matter whether these different models, look like ours or are completely different, as long as they've got it at their core. And that they really do add up to a stimulation for companies to increase investment. I think that's the really key thing. And I'll close there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nick. That's great. We're overrunning on speaking, and I'm getting a long list of rather good questions from all of you. So I'm going to do the shortest introduction you've ever seen on John Rex, because he knows so much more about antibiotics than I will ever learn. I first met him as co-founder of New Drugs for Bad Bugs in the EU's Innovative Medicines Initiative. He was the Chief Strategy Officer for Carbex, and he continues as Chief Medical Officer and Director for a drug discovery and development company. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Dame Sally. So let's see, next slide. Bingo. All right. So reigniting innovation, when to push, when to pull. By the way, you're welcome to copy these slides. There's a website where you can pick up pretty much anything that I'm currently thinking about in a newsletter if you're interested. Disclosures, next. All right, so 3 themes. Number 1, antibiotics are the fire extinguishers of medicine. So we're going to start with a pop quiz. Wake up, everybody. Have you used a fire extinguisher today? I want you to think about that for a second. Think really, really hard about that, because I know what the answer tends to be. So I'm going to make it really concrete. Are you using a fire extinguisher right now? You may say, well, maybe not, but let me ask you, are you in a building? Are you above the first floor of that building in particular? Do you think something might happen if a fire broke out? Yeah, it might. And if you're just at home, might you not have a fire extinguisher in your kitchen in case a grease fire breaks out? I hope you do. Another way we sometimes phrase this is, do you have life insurance? Did it pay off today? Are you using your life insurance right now? Think about that. So as has been highlighted in a couple of the talks already, antibiotics are unusual as drugs. They enable all of healthcare. They are our safety net. They are infrastructure for civilization. And Mark said it when he started talking about the benefits of antibiotics that go beyond using them. For most drugs, the only value in truth is when you put them into a human being who needs the drug. Antibiotics, oddly enough, have this huge value even when they just sit there in the pharmacy and you say, well, I could use it, but I'm not going to do it today. So knowing that they exist makes it safe to go have surgery. Knowing that you have a variety of antibiotics means you can make choices that reduce the pressure of development for antibiotic resistance. And there's this thing of insurance value that I think COVID-19 has really lit up for us. Hop in a time machine and jump back to last summer and pretend that I had come to you saying, here is my new medicine for this virus, this SARS-like virus, this COVID-like thing, and you'd say to me, I'm not having any problems right now. There's no disease whatsoever. There seems to be no value at all in you having created that, John. And yet, a year later, the value of such a drug would be nearly infinite. We're suffering for the lack of a suitable fire extinguisher. Also point out that had we had the right fire extinguisher early on, Might have had a few outbreaks here and there, but we would have put the fire out. It would not have spread. So that's the transmission value. And this is transmission. It's the not transmission value, really, rather than the transmission value that we're talking about. So antibiotics are the fire extinguishers of medicine. And the next question is, well, okay, I get that idea. If I would like to have a diverse array of fire extinguishers for resistant bacteria, how far in advance do I have to plan for those fire extinguishers? Well, if you're going to start from scratch, the answer is a couple of decades. It's kind of what it takes. This is a slide that Kevin Otterson pulled together that shows that the approximate time from the discovery of the first molecule in a series to initial registration in the FDA is a reasonably good marker of a product of that class. And it takes a long time. And in particular, it takes a long time, and I'm not sure that should have lit up. I'm missing something there. Okay, I'm going to leave it alone. If you look at the names, and I'm just going to point out some of them, like the second one down, oxazolidine, that's a novel class. That took almost 4 decades to appear. So the more novelty you want in a drug, the longer it takes to create it. So, if you want a new fire extinguisher, got to start today, and you'll have it in 2 decades. So actually, we should have started 2 decades ago. And that leads us to the last problem, which is the problem of creating and sustaining antibiotics. This is the theme of push and pull that we've been pointing at. And the paradox of antibiotics is that if you invent a new antibiotic, something quirky happens. Rolf Wagner, a colleague, once said, if you invent a bad antibiotic, nobody's going to use it. But as Nick just pointed out, if you invent a really good antibiotic, use is very limited. Everybody says, congratulations, that's wonderful. I'm very proud of you. That's so important. We're not going to use it. And in both cases, prices are low by modern standards relative to other classes of drugs. And that usage limitation is actually correct. Rational stewardship limits sales, and that's a good thing. We do not want it to be the case that usage-based income will cover the costs. In fact, it takes a lot of money to have an antibiotic available in the pharmacy. If I just want to run the plant that makes the drug so that you can have it in your pharmacy in case you want to use it, I'm going to spend about $25 million a year just to maintain that plant, sort of an average cost. It depends on how much I want to make, but it's not cheap. It is a significant amount of money per year to make the drug so it's fresh in stock in your pharmacy. Multiply that by 10 years, that's $250 million. If I were to hand you a brand new approved drug, give the keys to the plant that makes the drug and all the approval paperwork, you would actually need that $250 million plus another $100 million to do some post-approval work over the next 10 years in cash before you broke even. That's not setting up sales of the drug, because sales is only partially profit. So it's going to take a lot of sales before you actually stay in business for 10 years. And that's the problem. We're seeing antibiotics go out of business. Of the last 15 drugs approved in the United States, actually globally, 5 of them are now out of business because they went broke. And none of this income covers repaying the investors. The average cost to approval is $1.3 billion. So you can really see why investing in antibiotics is complete madness from a financial standpoint. We have to fix that. And so this is where the ideas of push and pull come in. Push is the idea of providing grants and other forms of non-dilutive funding early on. You heard mention of Carbex a moment ago. It's done a great job of stimulating a lot of companies. They've invested in 50, maybe even 60 companies by now. We recently heard the announcement of something very exciting, the Amr Action Fund, which is a collaborative effort of the pharmaceutical companies around the world to provide $1 billion worth of money to pay for phase 2 and phase 3 development to get the drug from phase 1 into registration. All of that is simply about getting it produced. We still have to keep it on the market. And as I said a minute ago, that's not cheap. That's not free. And so this is where the idea of pull comes into play. We need to start paying for antibiotics by understanding them as being fire extinguishers. Fire extinguishers are things that you buy, you have in your office, in your building, and you hope to do everything with it but pull the trigger. You can't pay for it based on a per patient use. And this is where the UK pilot is so incredibly exciting. The UK pilot, the thing that wasn't stated is that it set a benchmark. If you do the math on the UK pilot, 10 million pounds a year for 10 years for a drug. It's 100 million pounds over 10 years. Scale that up. The UK is about 3% of the G20. So multiply by 30, you get 3.3 billion pounds. The UK has said a really interesting new antibiotic is worth 3.3 billion pounds, or approximately $4 billion. Think about that for a minute. That's the cost of a new fire extinguisher. That's what we should be paying. And a lot of people have done this math, and the numbers are in that range. A superb antibiotic, $4 billion. They're not going to all be worth the same, but the number that you need to pay for any antibiotic, any new innovative antibiotic, is somewhere between $1 and $4 billion. That's what it takes. So strong work to Team UK for working this out, and for a government and a major HTA working together to sort this out and say, this is actually what it's worth when you think about it carefully. So the key now is to engage and extend on this. Wealthy countries need to contribute their fair share. The targets must be fair and consistently available. And so far, the only sizable further effort is in the United States. So that's my conclusion. Antibiotics, fire extinguishers is medicine. The problem is well defined. You don't have a fire extinguisher, the house burns down, the patient dies. Problem with creating fire extinguishers is we don't have a mechanism for paying for them the way we do for real fire extinguishers. It takes a real shift in thinking. We normally only pay for drugs when we put them into a human being. Antibiotics are unusual. We have to change the way we do that. Like other infrastructure, we have to buy our antibiotics in advance so they're in the pharmacy when they want them, when we want them. Fire extinguishers and medicine, thank you very much. Back to you, Dame Sally.
Thank you very much. So there's perhaps a better hashtag than Save Our Lobster. Both of them are important metaphors. We've had some great questions. Unfortunately, we've probably lost Mark Wilcox as he's gone off to advise the British government on COVID. And that led to one question that I need to address that came in early. How can COVID-19 trigger the global AMR crisis? Well, it's because many people with pyrexias, high temperatures, are being prescribed drugs, antibiotics, when actually it's a virus. Meanwhile, those who become ill with lung problems or end up on ventilators in hospitals are given antibiotics because they may have a bacterial infection or they will get a superimposed one. So their antibiotics are being used more than they should be without sufficient bacteriological backup. Of course, the clinicians have to react and do their best for their patients, but the outcome is not brilliant. Oh, Mark is still on. So let's turn straight to Mark and ask him, before he leaves, to give us a quick comment on the question, what are the main medical barriers needed to address this AMR crisis? I think we should just move across smoothly to Mark. Oh no, he's now left. So we missed that one. Well, let me ask of the panel, for instance, let me ask Christine. There's a real problem here. One of our viewers has said, what would we do in a low and middle income country like Pakistan or Burundi, where no one's taking care of antimicrobial resistance? What do you think, Christine, that we need to do?
Well, in the work that we did as a part of Drive AB, we factored in access into the delinked payments. So we said, as John mentioned, for an important antibiotic, we need to make sure that the right patients have the right access, and then therefore they get a $1 billion reward to do that. But for that, in exchange, they also need to ensure that the patients are getting access. Now, this brings up challenges that really, frankly, haven't been tackled for antibiotics in low and middle income countries. There's no large donor organization that is sending out antibiotics or financing antibiotics like there are for antiretrovirals or antimalarials. So we need to look at new mechanisms for that. but we need to make sure that the small and large companies that are making the antibiotics also prioritize the countries that need them the most. And that's by taking and looking at the WHO GLASS database, understanding where the resistance is, and really making sure that those products are available in the right countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Here's another one. How open are health authorities to grant conditional approval and then accept real-world data post-approval? John Rex, how about you trying that?
That's a subtle one. Conditional approval is used selectively, and that's actually an idea that really only applies to Europe. The FDA doesn't have a comparable concept of conditional approval. They approach it differently. So I would say that, and I would say that the other part of it is that it's not just the regulatory agencies. There's often this concept that it's the regulators that are somehow the barrier, the problem. The regulators are really just the first group who ask the hard questions about what's the value of this drug? Who should I use it in? If I use it in, what's it going to do for them? And if the regulators can't get clear answers to those questions, then I promise you that the healthcare providers are going to say, I don't get it either. And so I don't know that this is specifically a regulatory problem. There's actually been a lot of work by I'm going to call it the tripartite of the Japanese Medical Agency, the European Medicines Agency, and the FDA to work towards globally harmonized regulatory pathways for antibiotics. It's now possible to do pretty much a single trial or single trial program to get a new drug approved. And I think that the idea of playing kick the can with when do we need the data it runs much deeper than you might imagine, because you would be unhappy with drugs that have a package that's so limited that the best you can do, at least in general, is a conditional approval for an antibiotic.
Thank you. So Nick, a question for you. What voices are missing from the conversation? What data is missing?
I'm not so sure that the data is missing. I think it's more the data, how the data is used. So in some ways, just building on John's answer to the last question, in some ways the regulators are on top of it most, because there may be inferiority clinical trials, but they do take really good notice of things like the actual the bacterial sensitivity testing and some of that sort of in vitro work, and they factor that all into the way the licenses are issued. What becomes a real problem, I think, is when antibiotics are treated by HTA agencies like other drugs. And NICE has traditionally not evaluated antibiotics, and part of the reasons that we've not known how to. But if you treat antibiotics like ordinary drugs, and you assess their value based on them being at best sort of non-inferior to an existing product, there's always going to be a problem. So I think the sort of methodological work that we're doing alongside the sort of the commercial contracting work, I think they're both sort of equally important in sort of trying to really capture the value of antimicrobial.
Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the one voice that we're missing is the patient voice. And we're missing patient groups because, unfortunately, people that have multi-drug resistant infections don't live very long. And you see that the patients have a huge ability to gather and to influence their governments. And I think that's really, we're not seeing the gains from cancer societies or heart societies that you see in other fields.
Here, here. Yeah. In fact, I've been working with our Cancer Society to get them to pick this up because, as you've said, it's a hidden problem. So let me ask you all a problem, and we'll go around to each of you. We've got all these global bodies, G7, G20, OECD, WHO, the EU, and they've all recognised the need for new commercial models, as has the US. But how do we move from that recognition for change to action? How do we make that change that we all are saying is needed? Let's start with John, then Christine, then Nick. And then if we have time, I've got one short question for each of you after that. John.
Yes, my thing would be never waste a good crisis. COVID-19 is a fantastic lesson for us all. As I said earlier, a year ago, you wouldn't have paid me anything for a COVID therapeutic. I couldn't have run a company. I mean, it's not going to happen. And now all of a sudden we desperately need it. Antibiotics work the same way. And so here we've got this real life example of what it takes. And, let me speak for a minute about the idea of non-inferiority. Sounds like new antibiotics are really not very good things. And I would like to see superiority data. Let me tell you what, when you can show superiority, that's a bad thing. You actually have to be willing to develop drugs before you can readily show superiority. I can show superiority right now with a COVID therapeutic over placebo. How do you feel about being in that trial where you're going to get randomized maybe to a drug that works or nothing, or as it is right now? So when you can demonstrate superiority with a new antibiotic, something awful has gone wrong and people will die. So we have to invent the new fire extinguishers before we need them. We have to get comfortable with this idea of non-inferiority. Non-inferiority is not a bad thing. Non-inferiority is not something I did because it was a dumb idea. Non-inferiority is the right way to develop antibiotics. We need to convey that to HTAs. The HTAs need to look at what NICE has done and use COVID as the leverage to teach everybody, to expand the echo chamber of conversation to all the stakeholders who need to understand this. That's what it takes to have the fire extinguisher. There's not another way. We're not hiding a better idea. This is how you develop the new fire extinguisher. So don't waste a good crisis.
Good one. So actually, before I continue to the others, I wonder if you want to pick up David Livermore's question too. Multiple companies are not finding it worthwhile to license antibiotics in the EU. And yet here we are all working hard. How do we reconcile that and get it to work? Because that's a real access issue in relatively rich countries, John.
It is. And this is an example of the law of unintended consequences, is what I would say. Let's come back to what the cost of a new antibiotic. Let me just say this again so that it's really clear to everybody. If I were to hand you today a newly approved, wonderful antibiotic, I say, here's the plant, here are the people who work in the plant, here's the approval letter from the FDA, here's the approval letter from the EMA. You need $350 million in cash over the next 10 years just to keep the lights on. What would be the annual sales of your new antibiotic? Well, they might be a couple $1 million in the US and a couple $1 million in Europe and a couple $1 million around the world because it's a new antibiotic and people reserve it, right? That's what we heard. And that's the right thing to do. Don't use it unless you have to. If you don't have a fire, you don't spray it with your fire extinguisher. Just leave it on the shelf. So, if I am now generating just, with, 5 to 10 to $15 million in sales of the new antibiotic, because there are a few fires around the world. And so $15 million in sales, let's pretend that half of that's profit, $7.5 million in sales. I can't keep the lights on. That's actually the fundamental problem. And so in Europe, there are post-approval requirements. You can't accept your marketing registration. You can get your marketing registration unless you agree to do certain things, and those things cost money. And one of the companies was very clear about it recently. They said, we can't afford to keep the lights on. Sorry. So, and you can read more about this in one of my recent newsletters. It is, all good reasons why we have those post-approval requirements, but the notion that they have that with antibiotics there's something funny going on is the challenge. So it's one of those cases. There was recently a call by the EMA for a strategy thinking to 2025, and a comment that Kevin Otterson and I put in was, well, we've got these things that are causing antibiotics to run to a negative value in Europe. How about if Europe starts paying for those things? You say you want to have certain kinds of data post-approval? Fine. provide the money to generate the data, because you got to recognize the drug can't pay for it. It's not like anything else.
Thank you. So let me turn to you, Christine, and ask you, what one next step are you going to take, and what one clear action do you want from the audience?
Well, the one clear next step that I'm going to take is to try to persuade European policymakers that we need to start looking at pull mechanisms in Europe, and we need to start paying to ensure that we have the access that right now we're severely, in some cases, lacking. So that is the largest aim of the work that I'm doing on the joint action. And I think if there's people listening to this who have feedback for me, I would greatly appreciate to hear it from back.
That's a rather nice one. So Nick, I'm going to go back to that other question about the global bodies, G7, G20, OECD, WHO, EU. How do we get them, not Britain, to move from recognition from change to action?
I think part of it is through through demonstrating what can happen. So obviously in your role, Dame Sally, you're playing a pivotal role in sort of providing sort of international leadership, and I'm hoping that we can provide some useful tools to help you in that through the work that we're doing with NHS England, the department, on these pull incentives. I do feel that that's the one area where I would like to see some really determined joint action from the discussions today. I feel that sort of push incentives are vital also, but I'm really sort of encouraged by the progress that's being made in those areas. So I would say some real concerted international effort to develop pull incentives, and I think the project we're doing is very much focused on investment in new antimicrobials. But from the work that Christine and colleagues in Sweden have been doing, I think we also have to remember that there's a very real issue about access, secure access to even existing antibiotics. So pull incentives covering both of those areas would be my call to arms.
Thank you very much, and let me thank everyone today. As you can see, it's a glorious sunny day in Cambridge. We've had wonderful speakers, technology that's worked to get us here, but particularly also my thanks to Pfizer for bringing us together today, shining a light on this AMR crisis, which is here now and can only get worse. I want us, as we finish, to look truly forward, but by all of us stepping forward. We know, and John Rex and all our speakers have highlighted, we're at this pivotal moment in time. How can we make that country can address AMR alone, just as we see with COVID? No one can do it alone. No country is safe until we all do it together. But together with industry, countries, those organizations and many others, we can and must work together to deliver antimicrobials as the global public good they are. So we've got to, as a globe, invest and collaborate to protect them. We've got to look to our international multilateral system to lead this, and we must all play our part. And we've got to have a focus on prevention, which is not only stewardship, but investing in health systems and hygiene and in access. Secondly, a focus on awareness, and that will need data as well as communications. And finally, innovation, and that's a lot of what we've been talking about today. So I want to say that wherever you are in the world, you've got a role in achieving all of these. So I'm going to give you some actions. I call on everyone to play their part and collaborate across borders and sectors to own AMR as a problem. I call on global actors to come together around governance and leadership. I call on countries, if they haven't got a national action plan, to do them. And I call on the world to value antibiotics. I call on industry to innovate and collaborate to accelerate antibiotic development. And I call on the investors to invest sustainably in these public global goods. And my call to all of you as individuals is to wash your hands and only take the prescribed antibiotics when you need to. After all, together we can solve this crisis. Together we can put in place fire extinguishers and save the lobster. Maybe we need the fire extinguisher to put out the fire so the lobster doesn't boil. Together, we are undoubtedly more than the sum of our parts. We can move on from the present pandemic and make sure that the new pandemic crisis that's coming up behind it does not get too bad. We can do so much more. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.